Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Wonderful to have you. And welcome to Jenny Nedelsky. It's her first PISLAP meeting. And we're very happy to have her with us today. So we're going to start by doing some introductions, and I'm going to turn it over to Perry Sedman, who's going to lead that part of the meeting and say a few words about PISLAP, and then we'll go back to Jenny.
Sure. Why don't we introduce ourselves with our names and where we are physically, and we'll just have a quick go around. Then I'll say a few words about the organization for those who are not familiar with it. So I'm just going to call out names of the people I see, and we'll start with Michelle.
Yeah, I took myself off mute. Yeah, so I'm I do community lawyering, I guess, in a legal clinic in Ontario, one of 71 clinics funded by Legal Aid Ontario. That's my main paid work, and I've been doing it for almost 4 decades now. And I also am a graduate student at Queen's, working on a concept of integrative reflective practice and introducing it as a core competency for legal professionals.
Wow.
So yeah, it's cross-disciplinary and cross-country research. So yeah, and I'm trying to finish it.
Where are you now?
I'm in Kingston, which is where Queen's University is, and my legal clinic is in Belleville. Yeah.
Okay. Welcome.
Welcome.
Duncan, you're next.
So I'm Duncan Holloman. I'm in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I am a former actor and singer. And then I was a lawyer for a while, doing mostly legal research and writing, and then shifted over, got a PhD in clinical psychology. So I've been a psychotherapist and a consultant for the past quite a few years now. And I'm mostly retired, living up here on Cape Ann. And yesterday I was cross-country skiing in upstate New York, which was fabulous.
Thank you. Welcome. Nanette?
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. I'm Nanette Shore. I am sitting in my office in the Bronx in New York City. Great to be here.
Bonnie, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bonnie Silvestri. I am living in Sarasota, Florida. And we usually say how it is. It's absolutely beautiful here, despite the fact that we're having a lot of attacks on free speech and academic freedom, but beautiful place to be.
Good to have you. Diane?
There we go, off muted. I'm Diane Fenner. I'm here in my apartment in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a retired litigator, and I'm spending time putting on events for the New York City Bar Association and working for some humanitarian aid groups and taking care of my family.
Welcome, welcome. Amy, you're next. Excuse me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Cohen. I am currently based in Philadelphia. I teach law. And Jenny, for like a minute, I was on the faculty at Osgood and have been a longtime fan of your work. So really happy for the chance to.
We've met, haven't we?
We have. Yeah, we have. Yeah, great to be here.
Good to have you. Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita. I am outside of Chicago in a Chicago suburb. We have snow today, hoping this is the last snowfall of the winter. And I'm on the faculty at NIU College of Law.
Great, great. Jacqueline.
Oh,
Jacqueline?
Jacqueline, yeah, or Jackie. Jackie
Well,
works too.
Jackie.
Hi, I am calling in from Toronto, Canada. I'm a practicing lawyer. I work for the Ontario Nurses Association for our nurses union here in Ontario. And I kind of became familiar with this organization and Jennifer Nedelsky's work in a master's degree. that interrupted some of my practice time, but that looked at what it would look like if our legal system and legal practice was loving. And that is kind of what made me learn about this organization and her work, and why I'm kind of here today.
Great. Welcome, welcome. Bruce, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Bruce Peterson. I'm a retired judge. I'm in my home office in Minneapolis, and I won't even talk about the weather.
Good for you. Nice to see you, Bruce. Ken, you're next.
Thank you, Perry. I'm also a retired litigator. I'm also like Bonnie in Sarasota, where we're hitting 80 degrees. And I regret I have to leave early at 1:30 because unfortunately I have a golf tee time and have to go play 18 holes of golf. But I was so interested in this subject and wanting to see everybody that I figured even if I could only come for a half hour, I really want to hear what I can hear and catch up later. So it's great to be with you all, and thank you.
Well, you could miss the first 3 or 4 holes too, Ken.
Got a ride coming. I got a carpool. Save gas. We got a carpool.
Lisa, you disappeared. I was going to call on you next. Where are you? Oh, there you are. You moved around on the screen. You fooled me. How are you?
I'm fine. Hi, Perry. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Peters' partner. I am I hate that word, retired. I was a union organizer for about 40 years, during which time we started a child elder care program to deal with caring. It definitely didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but you know, it was a net positive, but not what we had in mind. And I am fascinated by this subject and love being here with all of you. And I recognize many of you as Peter's beloved friends. So it's lovely to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. Mothur. Can't hear you.
Maybe come back to him when he's got his earphones.
Yeah. No, we'll get back to you. Let me know when you're working. Next, Kara.
Hi, yeah, I'm Kara. I'm sorry, I'm in the car, so I don't have my video on. But I'm from New Jersey. I'm in New Jersey right now. It's kind of cold and very cloudy. I was for 22 years a transactional attorney, focused mainly on healthcare law and large pharmaceutical, and worked pretty much a part-time after my children were born in some form or fashion during that time. I had my midlife awakening in 2020, I call it, and left the corporate world, and I became a yoga teacher, a laughter yoga leader, certified life book guide, and started my own business, and then got back into the law through Elaine Quinn and PISLAP and Kim Wright, and I now teach at Quinnipiac with Kim, teaching the conscious contract process and integrative law to law students. And I'm very focused on the intersection of wellness and the law, and really focused on bringing that to law schools and law students. And thanks. So glad to be here. It's been a while since I've been able to be in a live call, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Good to have you. Julie, you're next.
I also apologize for not being on video. It's my aspiration. I'm just in transition, but calling in also from Gloucester, Massachusetts. It's kind of sunny gray here today, but I'm a clinical psychologist. I also have a master's degree in international diplomacy and have worked in various projects that integrate the two. And I'm just very interested in how our public policy can can become more integrative and help us create a world in which it is easier to love, as they say. And it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you. Mothur, are you up and running?
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hi. Hi, I'm in England, in Devon, not snowing here, but is in the north. I teach at the University of Law and do some case work as well on a consultancy. I came across Jennifer's work through this book here that I've got, which I really love, and just been looking at, I guess, around civic spaces and how this relational quality might help. So I'm really interested in what Jennifer's got to say. Thank you.
Nice to have you. So I think that leaves just me, and I'll say a few words about PISLAP. My name is Perry Sedman. I'm on PISLAP's executive committee and have been a member of the group for 30 plus years, I guess, or 30 minus. I am a retired design lawyer, and I am now in Miami Beach, Florida, fighting the good fight with Ken and Bonnie. And it's about 80 degrees, sunny and breezy today. And I guess it's time for me to say a few words about PISLAP. So we are a nationwide network of lawyers, law professors, law students, legal workers, labor union organizers, and others who are seeking to develop a new spiritually informed approach to law and social change. We believe that human beings long to live in a world in which people can fully recognize and affirm each other's humanity, and that law can help bring that world into being through new legal processes that foster empathy, compassion, and mutual understanding. We hold conferences, write books and articles, teach classes, have ongoing conference calls such as this one, and in other ways try to support each other's efforts to create a new legal system that can help to heal and repair the world. So with that, I also invite any of you who are not official members of the organization to check us out at spiritlawpolitics.org. There's ways to join the organization very inexpensively. So I urge you to take a look at that and join us. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Nanette, who will introduce our speaker.
Yes, I think I'm not going to take much time to do that. I'd just like to turn it over to Jenny. And just in the meantime, I noticed that Stu Webb joined us. So maybe just before Jenny starts, we can have Stu introduce himself because everybody else is gone.
Oh, hi, yeah, I'm here. Good to see you all. And looking forward to hearing about this. Jennifer, and love you all. Over and out.
Great, thanks, Stu. Jenny, over to you to speak with us.
Great. Well, I'm so happy to be here. It's wonderful to see this diverse group of people committed to value and law. And I'm going to be talking mostly about norms today, but these are norms that intersect with structures of law. And I think it's very much in keeping with Peter's interests. We had been in touch just a few months. We re-met right before COVID at a celebration of the history of critical legal studies. And then we talked about my doing something, and then, you know, we hadn't quite gotten it organized. And so I'm so happy to be able to do it now and be with you. So I'm going to be talking from this co-authored book. My co-author is a political economist, Tom Mallison. And the book is called Part-Time for All, a Care Manifesto. It's supposed to be out later this month from Oxford University Press. So I'm going to begin with a quote that opens the preface to the book, which is from a piece I wrote on my experience of mothering. in 1998. One of the most important insights I got from having my children was the importance of routine physical caretaking for forming the basic bonds of connection. That initial insight broadened into a belief that physical caretaking is part of what roots us in the world and permits us to feel a connection with the material foundations of life, from the care the earth requires to respect for the labor that permits us to live as we do. The dominant culture of North America treats virtually all forms of physical caretaking with contempt. Until there is a shift in this basic stance, those who do the caretaking will be treated with contempt. They will be paid little and defined as unsuccessful. If caretaking were actually valued, there would be a revolution in the structure of our society. So that was in 1998. And now I'm here with my co-author with a proposal for a path to this transformation. The book is about new norms that could restructure our lives so that everyone, no matter how important their work was, experiences the joy and connection of caregiving, both physical and emotional. The norm would be that all who are able provide roughly 20 to 25 hours of unpaid care every week, an amount sufficient for them to acquire the knowledge and connection that care brings. The need to learn from care grounds our argument that everyone needs to do it. In addition, roughly 30 hours a week would be the upper end of the norm for paid work. We think these profound changes could have vitally important impacts, ending the unsustainable stress on families and the gross inequality for those who provide care. It could ensure that high-level decision makers actually know something about care, and those who know something about care would have access to become policymakers. And it's important to remember that even if caregivers were respected and well compensated, as long as one group of people makes the policy, in corporations as well as governments, and a different group of people does the care, we will continue to have dangerously ignorant policymakers. Part-time for all could end the long-standing degradation of care and those who do it, as well as the policy distortions that flow from the failure to recognize the value of care. So among the critical problems that face contemporary societies, we think that part-time for all provides a solution to 4 of them: unsustainable stress on families, persistent inequality for women and others who do care work, policymakers who are ignorant about the care that life requires, and time scarcity. These problems arise out of destructive norms around work and care. By norms, we mean the widespread expectations of how adult men and women should contribute to society and fulfill their responsibilities to each other. This book is about the transformation of those norms. It's about rethinking what is important by talking together about how we want to work, how we want to provide care, in short, how we want to live. What is needed is not small improvements like flexible hours, but the kind of fundamental change that can actually address these pressing problems. The book presents a proposal for reshaping the existing conversations about what's called work-family balance, which tend to be very narrow and distorted. So I'm going to begin with just a brief statement of how we see the 4 problems that we think we can address. The first is stressed families. We see that the unsustainable structure of work and family life puts enormous stress on families and forces workers at all levels into untenable choices between work and family. The stress has serious consequences, including health and autonomy for all, and almost certainly harms children with long-term intergenerational consequences. Of course, we recognize that families experience these forms of stress very differently if they're rich or if they're poor, but there is a common stress across from poor to rich. The second issue is equality. Providing care is not highly valued, and this low status, low paid activity is, of course, not equally distributed. Care is organized on the basis of status hierarchies. Those on the top, rich white men, do very little of it. They get others to do it for them, and those others are not random. They are people whose gender, race, class, ethnicity, citizenship status mark them as less important, less valuable. In fact, I often think that one of the key markers of success is how little care you do. Until these long-standing links between care and hierarchy are broken, care cannot be organized in a way that is consistent with equality. And this means that equality itself will be unattainable. I sometimes say to my political theory colleagues, so even if you don't care about gender and you don't care about care, if you think you care about equality, you better care about this. So we think that that you can't get a system of just care as long as power and advantage are also organized around hierarchies like gender and race. As long as there are systematic inequalities, there will be powerful incentives to get people at the bottom to do low-paid care. And the global inequalities will continue to provide a pressure on that, which part-time for all itself cannot solve. So societies can only achieve equality when the distribution of care is just, and they can only achieve a fully just distribution of care when there is equality. Of course, the most obvious category around which care is organized is gender. Around the world and throughout history, women have been the primary care providers. But today, of course, it's increasingly obvious that those categories that gender intersects with other categories like race and class. We argue that gender inequality is sustained by the mutually reinforcing nature of norms and of workplace structures. Hence, the only way we will ever reach true gender equality is by changing both cultural norms and workplace structures in tandem. Part-time for all, we believe, is the only feasible way to achieve this. Shall I keep
Can I
going?
just interrupt for 1 second? I think it might be Sylvia, but someone is not muted, so it's hard to concentrate.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that here. Oh,
There you go. Okay, so the next problem is what we call the care policy divide. And this is a problem that is the least commented on in the now extensive literature on care. What we mean is that those in top policymaking positions, those in government, managers, CEOs of firms, as well as the private investors and financiers who exert so much control over our collective future, are almost always people with very little experience of the demands, satisfactions, or importance of caretaking. In our view, this means that policymakers are, for the most part, ignorant of a core dimension of human life. This renders them unfit for the job. We should no more consider electing someone without substantial experience in caregiving to public office or appointing them CEO of a corporation than we would someone who had never held a job. Those who do have the requisite knowledge and experience, primarily women, have very limited access to high-level policymaking positions. Our claim is that knowledge of care is essential to all forms of good policymaking, and the necessary knowledge can only be acquired by hands-on experience. Reading reports, novels, talking to your mother, those are all good, but no substitute. To ensure that everyone has the capacity to make and evaluate policy, everyone needs substantial experience in providing care. And it's important to note, I think, that many efforts to make the existing gender division of care compatible with gender equality fail to address this problem of ignorant policymakers. For example, wages for housework or well-paid long-term maternity leave or part-time work that is overwhelmingly taken up by women or pensions for homemakers. None of these will solve the care policy divide. Indeed, even fixing the gender division of care would not be sufficient, although it's necessary. Only breaking the link between care and hierarchy can do it. As long as one group of people does the policymaking and a different group provides care, society will suffer from ignorant policymakers. And this would remain true even if the caregivers were better protected and compensated, and it would remain true even if women gain access to high-level policymaking by leaving care to be done by others. So the last of our problems is time. The problems of family stress, inequality, and care policy all intersect with the issue of time scarcity, and the warping of the experience of time. It's not just women who suffer the loss of autonomy and judgment that comes from the acute time scarcity of the current structure of work and care. When people are constantly stressed by long hours of work, multiple competing demands, compounded by anxiety about the future of their jobs, they do not have time for reflection or the habits of receptive thoughtfulness. At the social and political level, the current structures of work and care are a recipe not only for a wide variety of ills, but for a population too stressed and exhausted to protest them. Under our current arrangements, some of the most important forms of human connection, playing with children, caring for the sick, cooking food for loved ones, are experienced as chores for which people do not have the time. They need to be done quickly and efficiently so that people can get to their other chores and try to get enough sleep so they can get through long hours of work. There is no time for the slow rhythms of care, with its often vital attention to the details of the moment. Forcing that rhythm into haste makes the tasks stressful and unpleasant instead of connecting and sustaining, thinking of wrestling your toddler into a snowsuit in a hurry to get to daycare or rushing to make dinner. Not only do people lose the pleasure of care, but rushing erodes their knowledge of its potential for connection and thus its core importance for human well-being. This loss affects not only individual, but societal understanding of the value of care, and thus compounds the ignorance of high-level policymakers who have virtually no experience of care. And these high-level policymakers in both government and corporate worlds work under extreme time pressure of long hours and urgent deadlines. And all of us are likely to suffer from the consequences. As Rosa Brooks put it long ago in the Washington Post, when did we come to believe that crucial national security decisions are best made by people too tired to think straight? These are our norms of what high-level decision makers should be doing. And not only is people's judgment impaired by time scarcity, but there's increasing evidence that their creativity, indeed their basic efficacy, is undermined by long hours. Even people's health is affected by time scarcity, with its complex links to the structures of work and care. So those are the problems that we think we can fix. And I just want to say a brief word about the scope of this. So we think versions of the problems I've just described are present all over the world, although of course they take different forms in different contexts. And we don't want to say that the particular solution of part-time for all that we offer will work in countries with extreme and widespread poverty. But we do think the conversation about changing the norms about work and care is something that should be happening everywhere. Okay, so our core argument is that a real solution to any piece of this has to address all the core problems. We think the heart of the solution, therefore, has to be that everyone is responsible for providing care, regardless of how important their work is. A society committed to equality, to respect for care, to good public policy, and to thriving families cannot assign care to only a subset of the population. An equal, well-governed society requires a population, all of whom knows about care from doing it. And I think this is really important, everyone is a care provider, just as everyone is a care receiver, and everyone identifies as both. And finally, although the book is focused primarily around norms about human-to-human care, there is one great additional issue of care for the earth. The earth, with all its vast interdependent complexity of life forms, geological formations, provides humans not only with the necessities of life, but with the gifts of beauty, awe, and wonder. We think it makes sense to see this as care from the earth, requiring care in return. We see care for the earth as distinct from prudent resource management. A relationship of mutual care is not a relationship based on extraction or exploitation, even if that extraction is well managed for long-term availability. In a caring relationship with the earth community, humans no longer sit at the top of some hierarchy of moral significance. We are often one, very often destructive, part of a vast web of interdependence. So now, as I turn to just outline our solution, I think it's important to say that Part-Time for All would do more than remove these harms that I've identified. It would bring joy, pleasure, and satisfaction into human lives and ultimately improve the well-being of the earth community we are part of. Our objective is to challenge the inevitability of the existing norms of work and care, and to invite people to discuss how they would really like to live. We hope for widespread, small and large discussions where people examine everyday expectations about who should do what kind of work, for how many hours, who should be providing the care. These are basic norms that shape people's lives profoundly, and they ought to be subject to democratic deliberation. Most of the deliberation talk out there is about formal policymaking, not about how to have democratic engagement with the norms that shape our lives. Now, for the new norms that we're proposing to be effective, they need to be reinforced by and sustained within new kinds of public infrastructure. We might call these the infrastructures of care, about which there is more and more attention these days. And we see them as absolutely central to the project of Part-Time for All. The infrastructures of care include things like guaranteed economic security, affordable housing, living wages, high quality, universally available daycare, top-notch elder facilities, and so on. And so it's important that Part-Time for All is in no way a call for privatization, for shifting care responsibilities from the state onto already overburdened families. Quite the opposite. Our vision is of creating the cultural and material conditions underpinned by extensively resourced infrastructures of care that will allow for all of us, young and old, disabled and temporarily abled, to have enough freedom from economic worry to be able to participate fully in the joys and labors of care. For Part-Time for All to be feasible, the central economic requirement is that everyone has access to good part-time jobs. By these, we mean jobs that are flexible, secure, and high quality. The fundamental prerequisite of Part-Time for All is economic security. And we don't spend a lot of time in the book trying to spell that out, how you would get it. We think that can be done in different ways: robust public services, unconditional basic income, a job guarantee, some combination of these. And different countries are going to choose different combinations. In many parts of Europe, such security already exists. And I should say here that we have 2 chapters which Tom wrote, which is about the economic feasibility of this project, why this can happen right now under the conditions of global capitalism. That's not my job. I was very happy to have somebody else take that part on. My job is to persuade you that this is normatively what we should want to be trying to get to. But I will just say that the most powerful evidence for the feasibility for Part-Time for All comes from a number of Western European countries which already possess the prerequisite institutions. For example, the Netherlands and Denmark demonstrate the feasibility of having large numbers of quality part-time jobs. The Netherlands, which unfortunately is still highly gendered in its uptake of part-time work, still it's 47% of the labor force is in part-time work as of 2019. So it's the world's first part-time economy. So we argue that the society of part-time for all could be viably built on four main pillars: quality part-time work, time sovereignty, what is sometimes called flexibility, economic security, and care-friendly policies. And we know that each pillar is feasible because it already exists in some form. And we see no reason why the pillars could not be combined. So we're not advocating things that are completely untried. What we're advocating is a new mix of different policies out there that have proved to be viable. So now I'm going to turn very briefly to just the basics of the restructuring. So in our proposal, paid work, which we envision as somewhere between 10 and 30 hours a week, would continue to be a central way in which people contribute to society. And commitment to doing one's work well would be a respected value. But work would become just one among other sources of identity and contribution. Everyone would also contribute unpaid care, about 22 hours a week. When the demands of friends and family are high, children are young, parents aging, friends are sick, most of this care would be provided within those intimate circles. But the care responsibility is constant. When those immediate needs recede, people would provide care within their chosen communities of care. They would form serious commitments to mutual care among people they know and care about, neighbors, faith communities, clubs, sports groups. People are not caring for strangers, but the communities of care are not primarily family or close friends. Thus, care responsibilities extend beyond family, and the solution to degradation and inequality is not paying for the care, commodification of care, but of everyone offering unpaid, personally connected care. The objective is to recognize the forms of interconnection possible within the vast human diversity of talents, temperaments, and needs, and to encourage everyone to participate in ways suited to their particular needs and capacities. Part-time for all is a proposal about part-time work and care, but its outcome would be time for everyone. As the pace and stress of life recedes, health, peace, and daily pleasures expand. There is time for reflection about what matters. So it's also important to remember that norms around work and care can change and indeed have changed hugely over the past 100 years. There are many different examples, but I'll just give you one recent one. And this captures the kind of change that we're after. A friend asked a young male colleague at a Swedish university whether he would be taking the full paternity leave available to him when his wife had their first child, or whether he would feel career pressure not to take the leave. And he answered, "Are you kidding? If I didn't take the leave, all my colleagues would be saying, 'Who knew he was a money-grubbing careerist?'" So from concern about undermining one's career by taking parental leave, which is a story one still hears every day in North America, the norms had so changed that to fail to take the leave would subject one to the disapproval of one's colleagues. This is the kind of change we're looking for. Our project here is to radically change the kinds of things that generate approval and disapproval, support among one's colleagues, friends, and neighbors. New norms of work and care would, it's important to say, not be enforced by state law, even though various legal arrangements will be needed to support the whole infrastructure. But rather, like most norms, they'd be supported by the complex power of social expectation and the socialization that happens in families, communities, workplaces, and schools, just as is now the case with the norms that women should care and men should support their families. And finally, I just want to remind you that if you're feeling daunted by the depth, which I must say I am sometimes, the depth of the norm changes that we're advocating, it's very helpful to remember 5 recent norm changes. So the huge trend, all initiated by grassroots activities. Of course, the huge transformation with feminism, starting in the 70s, drinking and driving, huge transformation, smoking in public, and the acceptance of LGBTQ relationships. These are all things that started at the grassroots, ultimately get integrated into formal policy. I think in all these examples, changes in norms preceded state action, which in turn then strengthened the changes in norms. There's often a very complex interplay of norm change and state action, but there has to be some acceptance of new norms before governments will see it as in their interest to implement them in policy. Finally, there are several different kinds of reasons to be optimistic about the possibility of the norm transformations we're advocating. While moving to a norm of part-time work might once have seemed impossible, there's already considerable experimentation with it. We mentioned various countries are doing it, and many companies are trying on their own initiative to reduce their work week and reporting very significant increases in productivity. And maybe most importantly, technology, as you probably all know, is expected to eliminate as many as 40% of the existing jobs. And instead of trying to figure out, well, how are we going to maintain full-time employment under those conditions, we should take advantage of this technological pressure as an added incentive to restructure work around a part-time norm of 30 hours a week or less. And in addition, the reduction in resource extraction and consumption demanded by climate change can be relatively painlessly assisted by a reduction in work hours and income, at least for the top third of the income bracket. I should say we expect a reduction in income from the top, an increase at the bottom, and stable in the middle as people trade increased income for decreased hours. So in sum, we should not underestimate either the possibility of changing norms or their power to shape beliefs, behavior, and policy. Part-Time for All aims at fostering conversations that will shift norms and thus make the powerfully constraining norms that exist today, that men have to work and women have to care and work, the subject of democratic deliberation. The norms of Part-Time for All would also foster the care and collective responsibility for the earth necessary to respond to our climate emergency. We see our hope for conversations as the starting points for a positive interaction of norm change and policy transformation. Thanks.
Jenny, that was just absolutely phenomenal. You really addressed so much, and I just love that it's big, bold change that you're proposing. And I think that that is just beautiful to see. I feel we were all very excited to hear what you said and how much we could all sort of long for that opportunity. As you know, and as many people know, I did create a documentary. We went almost 10 years ago now to Wales and spent time in a small community to see how the fact that they have a year of maternity leave would compare to our very dire situation here in the United States, where we have absolutely no paid leave. And we have a law that has quite a lot of loopholes, the Family Medical Leave Act, which is actually in its 30th year. So what I love about this is you're taking the observations that I had, which were that even with the year off, there were so many problems that women had returning to work or just being written off because they knew people knew they were going to be gone. So that the theory that the policy doesn't necessarily result in a positive workplace situation or home life, which was what I was observing. What I think is so important about what you're saying is just this massive paradigm shift that could be done on a global scale. And I would include in your list of 4, the 5th would be how we so quickly shifted during the pandemic, and how many of my friends and colleagues said, just being able to throw in laundry during the day in between meetings and things like that, or making food for dinner and all of that made such a difference. But yet there was, and it doesn't seem to be distinctive entirely to the US, just to kind of rush back to let's go back to the workplace and everything. So how do you see that, I thought we were going to have kind of that paradigm shift as a result, because we did this on such a global scale. So how do you see that being able to happen when, can we draw upon, how people felt during the pandemic, or, how could we use that to kind of galvanize what you're proposing?
Thanks. So we do have a little section in the preface about the pandemic. So I think the main way to use it is how fast work changed, right? So people think, oh, you can't do that, it takes years and years. Well, no, we saw a huge transformation practically overnight. And now, you know, at least in Canada, we're seeing this push and pull about, so the federal government wants to start to force people back into their offices and people don't want to go. And we'll see what happens. But at least the structure, the practicalities of tensions around the structure of work are on the table. But what I found in terms of the conversation was that more was about, oh yeah, gee, it looks like care is important. If nobody's taking care of the kids, how can you get your work done? But there was less connection between the structure of care and the structure of work in the conversation. And so that's the part that I hope this book is really going to highlight, is because, as you said, even in Canada, everybody is, well, how can we get back to work, right? To work as we knew it. Well, who wants to do that? But I should say too that the story about the laundry between meetings, which I'm also sympathetic to, there is a danger of fractured work time, a fractured time, right? So there is no time that is just family. There is no time that's just work. It's all one blur, and there's no different locations. So that has its own risks. Okay, maybe I'll just leave it at that for the moment.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. So I think Kara was first with her question.
Oh, hi. I think, well, Jennifer, you kind of hit on what I was gonna maybe say, and I thought it was a great question, Bonnie, because I had the same on sort of how the pandemic has helped or hurt, because I was working part-time still at that time, and my children, it was easier. My children were older, so I didn't, have to worry about their schooling and everything. But I became available, kind of all the time during the shutdown, because what else was there to do? And I kind of didn't mind it, but people were like, oh, this is great. Now she's really available. But my sister, who was younger and had small children, it was just horrendous for her with the, you're tutoring and training. But I see the shift, absolutely. Like in our company, the general counsel was like, oh, no, you can't work from home, even though the company was attorneys have to be in the office. That was a mindset shift that yes, you can do your work from home. But I think you're right. It's being careful of where is the value placed on the care, and to be mindfully there doing the care, not that you're going to do it all in one location now. But
yes.
So you touched on it. Yeah.
So I will just say that we also talk about care for yourself, and we map out our suggested hour frames, that there should be a separate number of hours that's care for the self, because we're worried that otherwise for women, given the current norms, it's all going to go into care for others. So we try to specify that, and that's a piece of what happens when you're available all of a sudden.
Yes. Yeah, that's beautiful, because that was actually my other question. So I feel like you're just channeling me. It was where does self-care come into that? And that's beautiful, because I think that's absolutely necessary. So amazing work.
Thank you.
Amy is next.
Great. This is just it's a comment, I think. I love this project. I loved hearing it. And I just wanted to say that when you were talking about breaking the link between care and hierarchy, I thought, I don't know how to say her name, but the kind of the artist, Mira Euclides, has anyone seen her manifesto for maintenance art?
Oh, no, I haven't.
So it was in the 70s. But what she does is she challenges the idea, and this is kind of its core to your what makes art or what makes labor. So the sense that it is productive, it produces something in the end, versus its maintenance. Like you sweep the floor to sweep it again, right? You make the lunches, they get eaten, you make them again.
Right.
And there's this, I think, just this deep sense of resubjectification that one needs to revalue what it is to have an accomplishment or an achievement, something that's cyclical and is always repetitive. It doesn't produce a thing at the end. that just struck me so much as you were talking about, the way you started with a deep normative shift about what it is we value.
Yes, thank you. So, when I was going through a slightly longer talk that I'd prepared, figuring out what I was going to cut out, I had thought, well, maybe I'll cut out about this thing about how chores, become unpleasant. But I thought, no, that's so important, right? It's because people say, well, I don't like doing these things. Well, of course, who does? Who likes doing those things under time stress and pressure? And so the whole experience of these repetitive things that are part of so much caregiving and which don't produce, I have a line where, you're painstakingly feeding the baby and now you're going to have to do it again in a couple hours and it hasn't produced anything except stuff in diapers. Now you're going to have to take care of those. So I talk to my students about this too, the way in which, how deep this sense of what matters, what's valuable is production. And that's what we have to shift. And I really also think that the climate crisis requires this too. We have to transform how we manifest value. If it's about production and consumption, we're doomed, right? That's anyway.
Amy, it would be great if you would put the name of the artist you mentioned in the chat, just so we can all find her as well. I think that Mothier, and please tell us if we pronounce your name incorrectly, is next.
Thanks, Bonnie. No, that's right. Yeah, Mothier. Thanks. It was great. Thanks for the talk. Something that struck me, I love the word that you mentioned, infrastructures of care, that phrase. And you said something about the state and not holding it. And then I guess often it's, it'll be a market. It'll be the market which will be able to deliver this care, which we're seeing in England a lot with the NHS being struck off and so on. Where in the infrastructures have we got the space if it's not the state or not the market? The other thing I just wanted to think a bit about was when we often think about transformative change, we often think of it as a left sort of, when I say left, as in politically left driven thing. But for care, I wonder, in terms of this sense of care, is it more of a conservative value, more of a value that comes from, so, could transformative change come from a conservative value of care rather than, is that how it's viewed, this sense of care that you have?
Sorry, I just want to say another word about the last bit. Are you saying that care is often kind of coded as a conservative value?
No, I would just wonder how it is. There is Common Cause Foundation in the UK, which is looking at empirical evidence of how values are considered, and they sort of objectify it in two sets: intrinsic values and extrinsic values. And one of the things I found interesting was community is that he said was often seen, it goes over both. Sometimes it can be an intrinsic value that engenders care and compassion, but also can be seen as an extrinsic value that is about mastery and control. I can put a link to their work, but so my question, it was more of a question as to how is care viewed? Was it in terms of those you've interviewed or spoken, is it something that's favored by the sort of the left liberal field or conservative field?
Well, I haven't tried to assess that actually, but what I think is that care is both a necessity, right? So that's part of the argument, right? Care is a necessity for human well-being, and care, as the feminist economists have taught us, care is also the bedrock which allows for production, right? Unless the care work gets done, there's no possibility of economic productivity. So it's a requirement, it's a necessity, but it's also the grounds for relationship. And so there's a piece that I didn't get into here, is that relationships require care and care builds relationships. And relationships are really at the heart of what makes people happy. So care is both a necessity, kind of an extrinsic in that sense, and and in tremendous intrinsic value. And yet, despite both of those things, it's denigrated. It doesn't count as in the ways that productivity count. And so just a brief sentence about the infrastructure. So I do think the state will have a role to play in sustaining the infrastructure, in having adequate childcare and elder care. The kind of community care and family care I'm talking about will not replace the need for those things, so it will reduce it to some extent. So the state will have a role. The market, I would say, plays the least role here, right? Because I'm not looking to commodify care as a path to valuing it. And a bunch of care which has been commodified, has to have been commodified because there's not enough free care available, won't have to happen. And I'll just say one, because this is a question that often comes to people's mind about the global care chain. What happens to all the millions of people who are relying on this horrible structure that I want to dismantle to provide them with a livelihood? And my answer to that is that the call for care in private homes will go down, which is a good thing because that's where the worst abuses happen. But because the infrastructure in most countries will have to be increased, there will still be a demand for caregivers, probably enough to absorb the sad effects of global inequality. So,
Nanette.
Thank you. Jenny, just all of that last point, interestingly, a lot of my clients, I work in a organization that represents low-income people, and so many of my clients are caregivers. They're home health aides and go in and care for the elderly and others. And so that question was in my mind as well. Thank you so much for your talk. I guess, what I was thinking about was how attuned to PISLAP your vision is in the sense that, we speak so much about transformation of the law and the legal culture through an emphasis on connection. And really that does seem to be at the heart of what you're proposing here, a solution not only to the issue of childcare or elder care, but really a rethinking of how we are with each other and what it means to make policy and needing to be connected to the people that you're affecting in a very deep way, in a very personal way, and of course the interconnection with the earth. So it's just maybe more of a reflection that what you're proposing here to me so much embodies what we aspire to think about when we think about shifting the law and the legal culture, and also the transformation through norms. So we haven't focused a lot in our group on sort of legislation, legislative advocacy, which I do in my work life, but a lot of what we talk about is shifting consciousness and shifting people's sensibility about what the culture should look like, and that then building a foundation through sort of a parallel culture for then, sort of naturally it coming into law, into legislation, which I think is what you're saying. So I don't know if any of that, was sort of like, I guess maybe my question might be, did you come at this project through starting to think about caregiving, or were you thinking of sort of more of a big picture solution to some of our larger issues, and then it kind of came down to caregiving, or maybe it was a mix of all the above? So.
Okay, so first I just want to affirm the things you were saying before, that I found it helpful listening to it, because I think what we think Part-Time for All offers is a set of concrete changes which can take place at a huge different range of scales, right? It can take place with an individual, but negotiating with their employer. It can take place, a city could decide to try to implement it, given, a law firm could decide to try, it doesn't have to be a top-down project. And in part because of that, it's offering a kind of practical, concrete path towards the sort of transformation in affect. And that's part of what we see, is you don't get a different relationship to care unless you do it. And so there is a kind of chicken and egg problem, right? How do you get people to get started? And so we hope the book is a nudge in that direction, that people can see that something they really want could be possible. So I think it tries to be a concrete version of that. This is how we could start to shift the affect of an entire culture towards care and away from production and consumption. But on the last part, so when I went back and reread this essay I wrote on mothering back in 1998, I thought, without realizing it, the germs of all this were there. That my experience of having young children and how hostile the work environment was,
yes,
my capacity to do that the way I wanted to, I think that was the starting point. And then was care, was making it possible to engage in care in the way so many people want to. And then I started to see all these other linkages, and I should say that my most recent project is on going back to property, which is what my first book was on, to redefine the meaning of property and land to include the responsibility to care for the earth. So that's not a regulation, that's the definition of property, right? We redefine property and land to build that in. And I realized that what we need to do, I'm just slightly restating what I said, what we need to do in response to climate change will require this shift in affect, right? If we don't start to pay attention to care and care for the earth, there will never be enough motivation to do what needs to be done.
I think we lost Julie Oxenberg, who was going to go next. So Lisa, you're up.
Thank you. So many things I'd like to talk about, but I just had this personal reaction to the idea of being able to care in a better way. And I always longed to be able to do it without being in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if you all had looked at all at doing, like, I'd rather clean the house with other people. I'd rather cook dinner with other people, I don't know that I want to do all my childcare with other people because I like the intimacy, but certainly some of it. And I wondered if you all had looked at that.
So the main way we looked at it is very brief. That is, we have a little section on some of the sort of infrastructure things that could happen. So like a city could have regulations so that if you want to build a new condo, you have to have, instead of the party room, you have to have a communal kitchen. And ideally it should be right next door to a childcare space, with a glass wall between them so you can see, so people can just easily say, okay, this is the Wednesday night dinner group. We're just going to get together and our kids are going to be playing next door while we're making dinner. And that's, example of a small thing that if collectively, if every city, which of course does regulate building, tried to start thinking about that. So it's not just let's build a daycare, let's build care-friendly housing, for the elderly, for children, for one another, that we could start getting somewhere if people turn their minds to that. And I think the communities of care, right, has an idea that so let's say you're a physical neighborhood, which wouldn't be the only one, could be faith communities, could be your soccer club. You'd have these kind of daily or weekly interactions with people where you kind of exchange care in a, complicated way that also build that sense of caring with others.
That's beautiful. Duncan.
So thank you, Jenny. And it certainly speaks to my heart. Part of the reason I left the practice of law was for exactly the reason that you're talking about, which is that I wanted to be able to care directly for people. So I became a psychotherapist instead. I'm a big fan of Robin Kimmerer's and just loved her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And it sounded like that's part of what you were talking about here, about a reciprocal, mutual relationship with care. The earth cares for us and we care back. The connection I was hoping you might be able to help us make is with maybe more specifically with the practice of law. What you said about property, for example, makes sense to me. And I'm wondering about the practice of criminal law, restorative justice, shifting from retribution to care actually for the person who's been guilty of a crime of some sort. So I just wanted, because some of the threads of this was in your earlier book on a relational approach to law. And I just wondered if you could speak to some of that.
Yes, so that's another of my new projects. I don't know how far I'll go with it, but I realized that I thought in the laws relations, I really managed to, I thought, do a good job of explaining what a relational approach to autonomy would look like, right? That autonomy is enabled by relations. But I thought that I had kind of sidestepped what are the implications of that for responsibility. How do we understand what we're responsible for, what we should be held accountable for in an equally relational way, that I hadn't gone fully down that path. And so I was really invited to think that way, because in Canada, the Supreme Court has told judges that when they have an Indigenous offender in front of them, they are obliged to take into account the history of colonialism and residential schools and try to factor all of this context at the sentencing level, and they're also charged to try to reduce the over incarceration of Indigenous peoples. And when judges try to do this, they don't do a great job, actually. The first thing they do is they say, well, there were these harms in the past that the government is responsible for. And unfortunately, the Indigenous people have not been able to overcome those harms, and therefore they're in trouble and blah, blah, blah. There's nothing about the ongoing failures of the state, that what kind of education was available, what kind of healthcare was available to the individual who's now before the criminal justice system. There's no sense of trying to say, well, who and what institutions are actually responsible for the harm that faces us in this case? And I think part of the answer, and so this goes to your question, is that all the legal tools available to them are about individual responsibility and blame. And the purpose of apportioning blame to individuals is to send them to prison. So the whole thing is doomed from the start. And you can really see progressive, well-intentioned judges struggling to say something intelligent and compassionate about the responsibility that an individual bears for some harm. And they just don't know how to do it, because the whole system is set up, as I say, to assign individual responsibility, not paying any attention, but then they're asked to insert something about the history, and they just don't know how to do it. Anyway, so this is the way in which I'm now trying to think about this in the criminal law context, but in the light of abolition of prisons. Because it's, as I say to some of my graduate students, it's kind of depressing to spend your graduate career trying to do a better job of more fairly sending people to prison, right? This is not a satisfying project. So anyway, that's how I'm trying to address it, is not so much actually in the care language as in the relational responsibility language. If we took that seriously, what would our criminal justice system look like?
Jackie.
Hello, thank you so much for this talk and manifesto. I am deeply excited about it all and can't wait to read it. I just wanted to share a story, I'm convinced it's the answer. I just wanted to share a story a little bit as to why, and kind of maybe get your feedback on this community organizing that we've tried to do and been unable to do because of time stress. But so a few families that we all live in the same neighborhood, we all kind of have had enough about over our current consumption patterns, over wanting to develop a better relationship with the earth and our neighbors. We created an organization called the Net Zero Neighborhood Project, and it's just three families, and we've all got very small kids, all toddlers.
Are you in Toronto? Is that
yeah,
right?
I am.
Yeah. I just was on a meeting last night where they talked about the net zero neighborhood. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, I think there might be a few cropping up. So we're like one little one with small children. You know, our grand vision was that, one, we would be able to share resources about how to kind of green our lives. Also do some organizing work around, you know, put together a free store for children's clothing and toys before the holidays to like reduce consumption of all those plastic goods. And to the point of even getting together to make kind of like weekly snacks for everyone so that we weren't buying packaged goods. And then also developing this like this kind of relationship with each other and each other's children, so that in a climate change adaptation mode, thinking that like if you know, another pandemic hits or issues hit, we already have this network of care within walking distance of all of our homes, pre-established and built up, and then that would give us some amount of resilience in the face of those challenges. And I will tell you that despite all our grand ideas and hope, it has been the time crunch of all of us working with small children that has been totally the barrier to getting it off the ground. And I'm just, I guess, wondering, you know, with that story with that context, kind of what kind of recommendations you would have, or policy recommendations. Is our challenge then to look for part-time work to be able to get those things off the ground? Or what's your take on that story?
Okay, well, first of all, it's a great story. It's a beautiful aspiration, and so important. And I think, you know, that climate change sometimes looks overwhelming, right? And if you can build a community, even a small community that is trying to address it together, then I think it shifts that sense of impossibility. But I do think, yes, the answer is part-time work. The problem is, of course, you know, that we don't have a system of part-time work that provides a living wage. And Tom has the stats on that. There are lots of places in Europe where it's already available. You know, you can earn a living wage on 30 hours a week, but in most of the big cities in North America, you can't. And you know, it is really an audience problem for us that the US is just off scale here, right? That's where we're publishing the book. This is Oxford, New York. But, you know, there's, as you said, there's not even a maternity leave. They're just so far from this. And the economic inequality means that, you know, to be in New York City, how long would it be before you could actually possibly imagine having a living wage on 30 hours anyway? But I will say, I won't go into all the details, but so I left the University of Toronto for Osgoode Hall Law School because the U of T would not promise me that I could go to part-time, and Osgoode created a part-time job for me. And I was very grateful, and it was wonderful, and I like my colleagues, but, you know, actually good part-time work doesn't exist. So I get there and I find out, oh, I can't be on the hiring committee, and I can't be on this, and because those are defined, you have to be full-time tenured faculty. So there are all these, and then they have hit a financial crisis and they say, no, actually, we're not going to renew your contract like your letter of appointment promised. So it just, even in my very protected position, I saw how I thought I found the solution. Well, it was a solution, but it was really not a perfect solution because the system is not set up for that. And so that's really, so I do think it's a combination. And I will say, I've talked to a lot of different lawyers, mostly government lawyers, who, when they hear over the years that I've been working on this, they say, oh, well, you know, I talked my boss into it. There's not a policy, but individual people have crafted part-time positions, and they over and over again, their bosses said, this won't work. Well, they prove that it does work and everybody's happy. So that's why I say the scale of how to engage. If you can find enough money through part-time work to live in downtown Toronto, which is not as bad as Manhattan, but is, you know, pretty bad.
Yeah.
That is really the challenge. And so I am part-time, but you just keep finding more things that you should be doing. There's one crisis after the next out there in the world that one should be responding to. And so I don't think that cultural shift around time is going to be at all simple. It's not like, oh, if I just work these many hours less, I will naturally assign them to care and leisure and a little bit of community activism. By the time anyway. So I hope we can talk more, because I'm very keen to hear more about this project, and I totally understand how time is the barrier.
Yeah, I would love that. I will reach out to you, Jenny, because I'm also interested in perhaps maybe getting you to speak to the nurses union too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Let me just say one last thing, since I think we're probably almost out of time.
Yeah.
I'm very keen to find people who have connections to unions, to employer organizations, I'm not the one to organize a pilot project. This is not where my skill set lie, but I would like to meet with people who might want to do that, because I think that's the next step here, is we need some pilot projects in different kinds of organizations. But I finally figured out I don't want to apply for a grant to do that. I want to help other people who have those skills do it. And so I'm keen to have anybody who has that kind of interest contact me.
So Jenny, we're about to run out of time, but I think this sort of speaks to something we've been talking about in the executive committee, that we need to have more follow-up meetings where we talk through some of the things that started to germinate. So I feel like we're really doing that. And I want to, at some point, have the screening of my film so we can talk more about that as well. So I'd love to do that with you, possibly also in conjunction with the New York Bar Diane is writing to me. And then the other thing I was going to mention, this is so brief, but when I first started working in New York City, I actually worked 35 hours, and that was considered a full-time job. And I was going to say that the reason I think we were able to do that was because it was backed by the union. So it was a union position, and it was actually kind of perfect because we had healthcare and everything. So I guess that was in New York. So anyway, I was thinking in response to Jackie about the importance of unions. So let's talk again and invite you back to have sort of more of a working group kind of idea, so we can get into the details.
Can I say two things? One is, don't close the meeting, please, because I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, and I never can remember how to save it. Maybe one of you.
I'll save it for you, Jenny. I'll save it for you right now. Yeah.
But so I did just want to, has Lisa, no, Lisa, I just want to say, I'm so grateful and honored to have you here, Lisa. And Peter was one of the group of the critical legal studies people who kind of saved me in the 80s when I was a miserable, angry assistant professor at Princeton. That there were actually people who were academics who I could talk to and be supported. And then we reconnected at the critical legal studies history thing right before COVID. And I found out about PISLAP, but I'd read his work off and on. And so it was so wonderful to me to hear that he had this whole organization that I didn't know about that was so attuned. And then I told Nanette that after we made our first arrangements for this talk, I finally went to my office for the first time since COVID. And there was an envelope from Peter. He had sent me, one of his latest essays with a nice little note. And so
it wasn't originalism, something.
No, it was the A equals W. It was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That one.
The Colorado piece.
Yeah. Right.
But it was just like somebody reaching out and saying, yeah, this is a good idea. I'm glad you're doing this, Jenny.
That's so wonderful. Thank you for explaining. Well, may I say one tangent while we're all together? I just want to say to the people in Sarasota, this fight for New College,
yes,
which I hear about on the news every night, you can't believe what it does to my heart, because, Peter was head of New College for 35 years and was in a brutal fight to keep it open as long as they did. And I don't know, It's just such a bizarre experience every night on the news. Sorry to frame shift, Jenny. But I wanted to say that out loud because I was listening to you all talk about that.
I've been
But-
talking about the connection and whether there was a tie-in. I've been mentioning that to Nanette. It's absolutely tragic to be here, and I would love to tell you more about what it's like, sort of seeing it up close and personal like this.
Okay, but anyway, back to part-time for all. I'll help with the co-housing part. Okay, thank you so much, Jenny.
Pleasure to see all of you, and so we'll talk more about future conversations.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It was just fantastic.
Great.
I for some reason I'm having trouble saving the chat, so maybe it'll save when I leave the call. But do you want to grab it right now?
I don't know how to do it. I mean, because I don't. It won't let me just copy it. At least on
Yeah, mine won't. I think I'll be able to save it when I exit the call, but I will try my best.
Okay, I think I may.
It's sorry to interrupt. It's the dots at the bottom of the comment meeting part. When you hit that, it says save chat. I just hit that. I think it did save it.
Yes, I think it
did. It did. Did it do it for you? And then it shows up place on my laptop. I can never have to go looking for it.
It's
someplace
mysterious, funny plain text or something. Yeah,
something like that. I don't know where, but I'll look and I'll send it to you if I've managed to do it successfully.
Thank you. And for my Canadian friends, I hope we'll get to follow up too.
Yeah, ironic because I've been thinking about how I've been working part-time for since my kids were born, right? And how I did that and what it allowed in my life. So, but I'll share that with you later, not now.
Okay. And can you send out my email to everybody? Do you have the emails?
Sure. Is that okay? I'm going to circulate the recording, and we have a list of about 750. So I'll include your email as well. So I do that.
Yes. Great.
Okay, wonderful. And maybe just a quick announcement. The date is not exactly set yet, but it'll be very shortly. Our next call will be a showing of a trailer of a film about New College of California and the formation of the law school, and a discussion about transforming legal education. So hoping everyone, including Jenny, will be able to make that. I will announce it pretty shortly. We're just settling on the date. So Jenny, thanks so much again. This was magnificent. Just the best. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure to be part of the group.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm driving, but I want to say thank you. Bye.